Good morning. My name is Sara Forrest, and I get to be your worship associate today. Time for all ages is one of my favorite parts of our Sunday service. I especially love it when I get to be up here facilitating it. And the reason why is because I have no idea what is going to happen. I may have to practice speaking cat. We might get pulled in wild new directions I never imagined, or I may hear something I never thought about before. But I love seeing how these young people in our congregation flock up here ready to share. I love, they weren't here today, but often we have our wily older ones who line up in this aisle so they can get the head start on their race to who will be in the RE classroom faster. Everything about how they come up here shows me that they know this is their place. Today, we are centering the sustaining power of spiritual community. I see these young people and our RE volunteers hard at work and play, building that spiritual community. And I'm so grateful for it as a parent and as an RE volunteer myself. When I come to church with my family, we're usually sitting over there, and often we have an entire crew squeezing together in the pews, jittery with the kinetic energy that's a hallmark to all kiddom. And half the time I'm sitting behind them, anxiously trying to get them to quiet down, not wrestle, or be too distracting. But sometimes I remember to zoom out and appreciate that they like to be together. And when they are together, they are themselves. I think their experiences in RE have taught them to appreciate each other, to feel comfortable with each other in a way that builds the kind of community we're talking about today. Many Sundays, I have the privilege of co-facilitating RE for the junior and senior youth group. Y'all, this is an incredible group of young people. We have a ritual opening, one that the youth have genuinely seemed to care about and have learned by heart. We ring a chime, and then we all settle down, and we get to raise our finger when we can't hear it anymore. Great way to test your age and your hearing if you need to. Someone lights the chalice, and we pass a bowl of stones and share our joys and sorrows for the week. And like we do here, we pour water over the stones to represent our shared community. I'm struck again and again at the energy of this group, their connections. Some of them have known each other since they were very little, and even with that, they are the most welcoming, inclusive group to anyone new coming in, often going out of their way to teach the ritual or help someone new feel included. We have a lot of fun, and joy is really important to this group. Perhaps you have heard the joy at times wafting up that stairwell when we get a little too raucous. But even with that, I've seen this group do hard things. They've managed conflict with each other. Sometimes they don't like the plans we've had as facilitators, and they've been brave enough to give us that feedback. In all that, I see how invested they are in their community and how safe they feel to express themselves within it. This month, we are going to be taking on a big challenge as a team. We're going to work on building our youth service for May. This is the time when the junior and senior youth are most visible to this congregation. It's a lot of work to put together. They come up with a theme, they choose music, they prepare reflections. Every year I've seen them support each other, back each other up when someone is unsure, give each other advice on how to work through the nerves. It's such a joy to watch them be empowered to share their voices with this whole congregation. I see the power of their community and this community that holds them in such esteem. I believe they know this is their place. I believe belonging in a spiritual community creates resilience where it is so needed. For our young people facing a lot of unknowns, I am grateful for the community they build and find here.
Our reading today is from my fellow Unitarian Universalist minister, Reverend Julian Jamaica Soto. And they write this: "Bring your broken hallelujah here. Bring the large one that is beyond repair. Bring the small one that's too soft to share. Bring your broken hallelujah here. I know that people have told you that before you can give, you have to get yourself together. They overstated the value of perfection by a lot. Or they forgot. You are the gift. We all bring some broken things, songs, and dreams and long-lost hopes, but here and together we reach within. As a community, we begin again, and from the pieces we will build something new. There is work that only you can do. We wait for you." So ends the reading. You know, when you decide you want to become a UU minister, as I did long, long ago at 21 years old, when you start discerning the call, the questions start coming: parish or community? You get pushed in all sorts of different directions. You hear there's a big shortage of parish ministry openings. Then a few years later, it's become a shortage of parish ministers themselves, and back and forth. For some ministers to be, a lot comes down to personality and preferences. I had one chaplain colleague tell me one time, I could never work in the parish because of the board meetings. But you know, they were fine with death and dying and fecal matter and all those things that come with working in healthcare. Sometimes it also depends on what's going on with our Unitarian Universalist Association at the time. I was lucky to come in just a few years after the association had gotten rid of what one might call the ministry binary, where ministers-to-be had to choose one of two tracks: parish, serving UU congregations, or community, chaplaincy, nonprofits, basically everything else. I guess along with our growing understandings of how problematic binaries can be, thinking of gender here for one, we also realized that ministry might be more of a spectrum also. So luckily, I didn't have to make that choice in such a committed way, having to select parish or community on a form the way some of my predecessors in ministry did. But I still had a decision to make about my ministry context, because I can genuinely say that my life was saved by finding UU community in a parish, by being welcomed and affirmed as beloved by the very first UU church I ever walked into at 19 years old, lost and broken and looking for something more. Much love to you, Arlington Street Church in Boston. I know how important our communities are. Heck, I even loved the board meetings and committees that college-age me started going to. And I also felt this call to chaplaincy, to being with people in the most raw and painful moments, in the depths of grief and loss, and trying to make meaning of it all. Now, it would take longer than the time I want to keep y'all here listening to this sermon to share the winding road and assorted traumas that got me to finally settle on chaplaincy. But I'm here to tell you this. Part of the reason I'm so grateful to be in the healthcare program where I work as a chaplain now, and where I have been for coming on 8 years, a Medicaid community program that serves older adults all the way through end of life, is that I get to cultivate a little of that parish ministry experience. Of course, much of my work is still one-to-one, home visits to the bedsides of the dying, deep conversation with folks working through mental health crises or trauma or a new terminal diagnosis. But one of the great delights of my work is that every week I get to lead what I call spirituality groups. Now, what does a spirituality group look like, you may ask? I'm gonna let y'all in on a little secret. Most of my patients don't realize this, but these groups, they're pretty UU flavored. We don't light a chalice, but we do have electric candles. We don't have a covenant, but we have a group promise. We read and promise to each other about how we'll treat each other in our shared time with kindness and respect and care. We take time, just like we do here, for sharing joys and sorrows. And I will confess, it is not uncommon to feature a poem by that poet beloved of countless UUs everywhere. Yes, you may have guessed it, Mary Oliver. Now, my patients come from a huge variety of spiritual and religious backgrounds, all of which are welcome at group. In fact, that's part of the group promise, and which they readily bring into our discussions and sharing. Because it turns out that the tenets of our UU faith, of covenant, of pluralism, of love at the center, are a pretty good recipe for building spiritual communities of care, whoever you are. And what I am reminded again and again of in these groups every week is the radical power of being in spiritual community together. So many of my patients have not had a space like that for a long time. Whether it's because they don't have the mobility to get to the community they used to be a part of, or that their faith community isn't accessible to someone in a wheelchair or with other access needs, or because they've been made to feel like they don't belong, like their mental illness or outbursts or some parts of who they are were not acceptable to the place they used to seek religious belonging. Many of them have been convinced by the ableist narratives of our society of productivity tied to worth that they have nothing left to give, to contribute. Yet, when we gather in our motley crew of folks that, if you did a rundown of their medical charts, would have everything from dementia to schizophrenia to Parkinson's and more on their problem lists, because that's how the medical model works usually. You become a list of problems to be solved. But yet, when we gather together, problems and all, something sacred happens. Something that reaffirms for me over and over the deep need we have for each other, for spaces where we can be fully human together, where we can, as one chaplain I know puts it, swim in the deep end together. The tenderness and wisdom I have seen unfold in these groups, the capacity to hold each other, the empowerment that comes from engaging in the reciprocity of needing and being needed, leaning on each other. There's a healing for the spirit there, even for people whose bodies cannot be healed or fixed or changed. It's a revolutionary challenge to the narrative we hear from the highest echelons of power right now. These eugenicist claims that the sick and poor and vulnerable are only a drain on society with nothing left to offer. And Oh, we've talked about them in group. The sorrows and fears over Medicaid cuts and hateful news pundits. But in the sacred circle of that group, in the place of spiritual community, we are reminded, you matter. It is good you are in this world, that you exist. You are sacred and worthy and beloved just as you are. This type of community, this type of grounding and worldview, this is what the world needs. This is what we all need. But of course, you all already know this, or you wouldn't be here today. Because here in Unitarian Universalism, this covenantal faith so grounded in our interdependent connections to each other, the importance of being together is kind of our whole thing. I'm a UU chaplain preaching to the choir, but y'all, sometimes the choir needs a good word too. A reminder of who we are and why we gather here. I think sometimes we can forget what a radical act it is to go to church, to show up here, to choose to be here. One of the most influential UU theologians of the last century, James Luther Adams, who wrote a lot about the importance of voluntary association. Not the sexiest phrase, but bear with me on its subversive power. Now, James Luther Adams, or JLA as he came to be known, spent a lot of time in Germany, studying with German theologians in the 1930s. He witnessed the rise of the Nazis and became involved himself with the underground resistance movement of the Confessing Church. He was detained by the Gestapo and faced many threats. And these experiences deeply shaped him and his theology and his work for racial justice upon his return to the US. He warned in his writings quite presciently, given our current political reality, about the risk of rising Christian nationalism and fascism here. And one of his most central teachings became this: by their groups ye shall know them. Now, this was a play off of Jesus' famous quote in the Bible, by their fruits ye shall know them. But for JLA, it was this idea that you shall be known by who you are in relationship with, who you voluntarily associate with. Because in JLA's time and in our own, fascism relies on the fracturing of bonds. It is an ideology based in fear, control, suspicion of the other, seeing everything and everyone as someone who would turn you in, who would throw you to the secret police, be it the Gestapo or the ICE patrol, someone you cannot trust. And that is why it is in and of itself anti-fascist to come together and love each other well. For JLA, this was the key to resistance against forces of fascism, hate, oppression, to intentionally create communities grounded in the spiritual values of love and care, to choose to come together over those shared values. I know a lot of people are kind of allergic to the term organized religion these days. Many of my patients are for sure. But that was for JLA exactly where resistance is born, in churches like this one, where you show up not because you are forced to, not because the government or powers that be have obligated or threatened you into compliance, but because out of your own free will and the call of your soul, you chose to be here, to weave relationship with others, to answer yes to life and love and to belonging. And ever has it been so. Even before JLA, this has been what sustained our Unitarian Universalist religious ancestors, how our communities of faith have given us the spiritual grounding and courage to resist in love across time. I think about the Unitarian and Universalist abolitionists of the 1800s, those who were active on the Underground Railroad, where bonds of trust were essential, were life and death in getting enslaved people safely to freedom. Those who, with the passing of laws like the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which legally required citizens of the free northern states to cooperate in the capture and return of enslaved fugitives to their enslavers, formed vigilance committees. Communities which came together to protect runaways from being kidnapped and returned to slavery in the South, offering everything from shelter to medical and legal aid to directly hiding and transporting people to freedom. They would look out for slave catchers and spread the word when they arrived, would impede and harass the slave patrols, protesting in the streets, storming courthouses in crowds to free the captured. UUs often like to bring up the big name leaders of these movements, like Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, whose congregation in Massachusetts gave sanctuary in their building to several escapees, and who somewhat infamously kept a pistol in the pulpit, ready to defend them from capture by anyone who tried to forcibly remove them. And God knows we have some big names from UU history who also supported the evils of racism. But I think about all those countless, nameless Unitarians and Universalists, the brave souls in the crowd and in the congregations and in the secret harboring of folks to liberation, who risked so much because they trusted each other with their lives, and because they were grounded in their faith in the worth and dignity and connectedness of us all, of a love that knows no bounds, a love that disobeys orders and unjust laws, a love that resists. And in their stories, I hear the echoes of our ice patrols and whistles and bravery of so many UUs today who are showing up everywhere, from the streets of Minneapolis to right here in Oregon, to defend our immigrant neighbors. From our history, I think too about the UUs of the civil rights movement, of the stories I've heard firsthand from UUs who answered Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s call for religious communities to Selma in 1965, a call that brought hundreds of UUs and around 1/5 of all UU ministers there. I was privileged enough to be in Selma at the 50th anniversary commemoration of that march back in 2015 with a delegation of UUs from around the country. I heard from those who had been friends with, who had marched alongside the two UUs, Reverend James Reeb and activist Viola Liuzzo, who were murdered there by white supremacists because of their work for racial justice. Those elders told us there and then that Selma is now, and I hear it in my head again and again in this world of today. In the call to Minneapolis that was made earlier this year, where over 600 religious leaders, including hundreds of UUs, our own Reverend Marcia, supported by this congregation among them, showed up, coming together to call for an end of the ICE occupation of Minnesota, where the blood of even more good people showing up in love had been spilled by the white supremacists of our time. Across the ages, these stories appear of regular, everyday people of faith choosing to show up on the side of love, choosing through that good old voluntary association to resist the cruel ideologies of the day. That might means right, that only certain lives are worth more than others, that dehumanize and strip away the beauty and value of every person, every living thing, the earth itself. Ideologies that commodify and exploit and oppress and kill and refuse the sacred truth of a faith that says, you are not a thing to be cast aside or destroyed or disposed of. You are beloved. You have sacred worth. You matter. And we need each other. That is what spiritual community is. Sometimes people are so ready to dismiss the value of it, to look at a place of worship as no better than a social club. But we know the truth, that it matters, that you're here today, that you keep showing up to gather at the wellspring of this community, to keep on weaving these connections, this resistance, this love, this place where we can hold each other in the fear and overwhelm, in the terrors of a week like this week, when leaders post about genociding an entire civilization, where bombs kill children, where our neighbors continue to be kidnapped and die in ICE detention centers. We need this. We need each other to not succumb to despair, to go on. And I say this as someone who has seen what happens when people don't have that. A place to be fully human, fully alive, fully ourselves, a place to bring our broken hallelujahs, where we hear all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers, where we make old friends, relationships of trust to carry us through our lifetimes together, where we answer yes to life and to love. It matters. Every time you show up here to reconstitute this sacred community, it could have been otherwise. You could have chosen otherwise. I always tell my patients at our groups, thank you for being here, because it's you showing up that makes group happen. Without you, there'd be no group. And it's true for you all, beloveds. Without you, there'd be no church. Yet here you are, choosing to show up steadfastly, resolutely, and that, friends, is how we go on. How we continue even when it feels too hard or hopeless. Writer and activist Rebecca Solnit wrote recently, lately I've tried to go light on the word hope. And all through the past year, the word resolute stayed with me, as in standing firm, resolved, determined, unwavering. That's what you can be, even if you don't feel hopeful. The word hope seems too sunny to a lot of people, but the heart of it, as I'm interested in it, is this. We make the future in the present if we show up and never surrender. Okay, in all transparency, she had an expletive in there, so it was really something more along the lines of never freaking surrender. But that is what we are doing here. That is the radical promise of voluntary association, of choosing each other, of regrounding ourselves in our spiritual convictions, of continuing our religious tradition of showing up against slave catchers and fascists and white supremacists and every hateful challenge to the divine mystery of love. We are never, ever surrendering. By our groups, they shall know us. By our faith in the power of the love we create together, we will go on.